Derinkuyu's subterranean metropolis. In 1963, a man in the Cappadocia region of Turkey was renovating his house when he knocked down a basement wall and found a dark tunnel. That tunnel led to another, which led to an incredibly massive, 18-story deep subterranean city called Derinkuyu, plunging to a depth of approximately 280 feet into the earth. This was a fully functioning underground metropolis capable of housing up to 20,000 people along with their livestock. It had miles of ventilation shafts, deep water wells, wine presses, schools, and massive circular stone doors that could seal off the tunnels from the inside. While we know early Christians used it to hide from the Romans, and Romans from Arabs in later centuries, the massive historical gap is who actually dug it out in the first place, and exactly when. Some archaeologists think the Phrygians carved it around 800 BC, while others argue it goes back much further to the Hittites around 1500 BC. However, we have no sure way of knowing who did this insane feat. Nan Madol Megaliths. In Micronesia, there's something that, given its age, shouldn't have existed. There is an entire city built starting around 1200 AD, constructed on top of the water spread across nearly 100 small artificial islands, connected by narrow canals built entirely from massive stone logs. Some of the columns used to build the walls weigh up to 50 tons, and the nearest matching stone isn't even on this island. It had to be transported from a quarry located on the opposite side of Pohnpei, across open water. Here's the insane part though. They've likely done this using nothing but rafts and human strength alone, since there were no pulleys documented, no draft animals, and no wheels. Oh, also, this was done with a population of just about 25,000 people. Not only that, but these walls are still standing centuries later. Oral histories claim the stones flew through the air using magic. Then, sometime before Europeans ever arrived, the city was largely abandoned. The Copper Scroll. In 1952, archaeologists exploring the caves near the Dead Sea made a discovery that stood out wildly from the rest of the famous Dead Sea Scrolls. While all the other scrolls were written on parchment or papyrus, this one was different. It was written on thin sheets of copper that had oxidized and rolled up tight over 2,000 years. When researchers finally managed to carefully slice it open and translate the ancient Hebrew, they realized they were holding a literal treasure map. The scroll lists 64 specific underground hiding places across the region, containing staggering amounts of hidden gold and silver, estimated today to be worth over $1 billion. However, there's a problem. It's a map that can no longer be followed. The directions rely on highly specific, localized landmarks that haven't existed for 2 millennia. Also, 7 of the 64 locations end with random, unexplained Greek letters, and scholars have no idea what they represent. The 64th entry states that a duplicate copy of the Copper Scroll exists, hidden in a separate location, containing a more detailed explanation of the landmarks. That duplicate has never been found. Despite decades of intensive searching by archaeologists and treasure hunters, not a single coin from the Copper Scroll has ever been found. But who had that much gold to hide? Historians generally fall into 2 camps. The first believes this was the collective wealth of the ascetic Jewish sect that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. The second theory takes us to 70 AD, when the Roman Empire laid siege to Jerusalem during the First Jewish-Roman War. During that war, the Romans completely destroyed the Second Temple, the holiest site in Judaism. Once the Jewish people knew the Romans were coming, the temple priests may have frantically smuggled the national treasury out of the city and buried it across the desert. Some others also think that it was either a work of folklore or wealth that was gathered during the Second Jewish Revolt against Rome. The Indus Valley Civilization. Around 2500 BC, while Egypt was building pyramids, another civilization was quietly building something even more incredible in the Indus River area. They were creating megacities which were incredibly advanced for the Bronze Age. They had what looks like early plumbing inside homes, public wells, and even covered drains running under the streets to carry away wastewater. They became the largest urban civilization of its time, spreading across an area larger than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. However, there's a problem. We can't read their writing. The Indus script has never been fully decoded, so the most important civilization at the time is still relatively unknown. Then, around 1900 BC, the mystery deepened. These massive cities were gradually abandoned. There's no clear sign of war and no burned buildings. The major theory we have is that a major river shifted its course or dried up, cutting off the water supply cities depended on. Sanxingdui's alien-looking bronzes. In 1986, archaeologists working in the Sichuan Basin stumbled onto something that would completely change what historians thought they knew about early Chinese civilization. Buried in pits beneath the ground were thousands of bronze objects, and they looked unlike anything found anywhere else in ancient China. There were massive bronze masks, almost the size of a human, with huge exaggerated eyes that stuck out from the face. There were tall bronze statues of human figures with oddly long arms and detailed clothing, and a massive bronze tree, more than twice the height of an average person, person, with birds sitting on its branches. This civilization dates back roughly 3,000 years, changing the centuries-old belief that Chinese civilization originated strictly in the Yellow River Valley, slowly spreading outward. We don't know what they called themselves, what their bronze constructions meant, and we don't even have written language from them. However, we do know how their story ended. Before abandoning their city, they smashed their most sacred bronze treasures and buried them in the dirt. The Phaistos Disc. In 1908, an archaeologist working at the Minoan Palace of Phaistos on the island of Crete dug up a small circular clay disc about 6 inches wide. Dated to around 1700 BC, it didn't look that unusual at first glance, but upon closer inspection, it turned out to be one of the strangest objects in ancient history. Both sides are covered in symbols, but these weren't carved by hand one at a time like most ancient writing. They were stamped into the clay using small individual seals, almost like an ancient printing press. This means the Phaistos disc represents the earliest known use of movable type printing in human history, beating Johannes Gutenberg's printing press by more than 3,000 years. The crazy part is that this revolutionary invention is a complete anomaly. No other stamped text has ever been found from this era. The Minoans did use stamps previously, but only with a single signature or symbol, like a royal crest. The Phaistos disc was actually created using a whole set of individual stamps, which allowed its creator to print a long, continuous message. Why they didn't use this brilliant system to mass-produce other clay texts remains one of history's greatest mysteries. To this day, the symbols on the Phaistos disc haven't been decoded. Voynich Manuscript. This is arguably the most mysterious book in human history. It was found in 1912, hidden away in an old Italian collection. Carbon dating places the book's material to the early 1400s, so this isn't a modern hoax. What makes it so mysterious is its content. The pages are filled with writing in an alphabet nobody recognizes, and alongside the text are strange illustrations, plants that don't match any known species, small human figures bathing in green liquid inside connected tubes and pools, and diagrams of stars and circular patterns that look like they could be astronomical charts. For over 100 years, the best codebreakers in the world, including the ones who cracked the Enigma machine during World War II, have tried to decode it, but none of them was able to decipher even a single word. We know that the writing follows Zipf's law, a statistical rule that dictates how frequently words appear in natural human languages. Also, some of the illustrations in there show stuff that we do know about, such as some zodiac signs. Some botanists have also tentatively identified a few of the plants. However, that's about it. We have no idea about anything else. The Sea Peoples. Around 1200 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean suffered a total apocalyptic collapse. In just a few decades, the world's greatest Bronze Age superpowers simply fell. But then, right in the middle of the chaos, ancient texts start recording something even weirder. A new mysterious group of attackers coming from the sea. We call them the Sea Peoples, and they show up, for example, in battle scenes carved into temple walls, such as scenes where they fight the Egyptian army near the coast. But here is the strange part. Nobody knows who they are or where these people actually came from. We don't have a map, a name for their homeland, or even one single origin. Some clues point to the Aegean region, near Greece. Others point towards Sicily, Sardinia, or even parts of Anatolia, as if several different groups joined together. The leading theory is that they were groups of displaced populations looking for new land after an environmental collapse caused severe drought and famine. The Picts. In northern Scotland around 1,700 years ago, there was a people the Romans called the Picts. Their ancestors were an incredibly powerful military force, so much so that they repelled the Roman Empire's expansion, forcing the Romans to build a massive cross-country stone wall just to keep them out of Britannia. Yet, despite being so powerful, this population is shrouded in mystery. They left basically no written records. We don't even know what they called themselves or what language they spoke. Almost everything we know about them comes from Roman accounts or from their neighbors. Adding to the mystery, they left eerie artifacts and symbols that were carved with incredible precision, which we don't know the meanings of, such as the Pictish beast, the crescent and V-rod, and the double disc and Z-rod. Then, over a few centuries, they just faded, blending into the growing kingdom that would eventually become Scotland. The City of the Gods. Just outside modern-day Mexico City sits one of the most massive ancient cities on Earth. Matter of fact, it was one of the biggest cities in the entire world at that time, with over 100,000 people living there, and the enormous Pyramid of the Sun and Pyramid of the Moon. Problem is, we have no idea who built it. We don't know what language they spoke or what their city name was. When the Aztec Empire found the city in the 1400s, it had already been abandoned and overgrown for nearly 1,000 years. The Aztecs were so awestruck by its scale that they named it Teotihuacan, which translates translated into the City of the Gods because they believed it was literally the birthplace of the universe and that only gods could have built something so massive. Then, sometime around 600 AD, the city's major temples and palaces were systematically burned and destroyed, and the city was abandoned once more. The Plain of Jars. Scattered across the Jiangqiang Plateau in central Laos is one of the most eerie and unexplained archaeological sites on Earth. Spread across dozens of fields are over 2,000 massive, solid stone jars, some standing up to 10 feet tall and weighing up to 14 tons. Dating back as far as 1200 BC, these jars were carved from solid rock and dragged miles from the nearest mountains. However, the biggest mystery is who made them. No known civilization has ever claimed them, and there are no written records detailing their creation. Local legends say they were created by a race of giants to brew massive batches of rice wine to celebrate a victory. Archaeologists believe they were likely part of complex burial rituals. Because the area is still heavily littered with unexploded bombs from the Vietnam War, archaeologists have only been able to safely study a fraction of the jars. The Canary Islands Castaways. This might be the most interesting gap in human migration history. When Europeans arrived in the Canary Islands in the 1300s, they found a thriving population. There was just one problem. They had absolutely no boats, no canoes, no rafts, nothing. So how did they get to an island surrounded by treacherous ocean currents? Studies of their language and their bones suggest they were related to groups from North Africa, likely arriving much earlier. But if their ancestors sailed there, why did that knowledge disappear completely? Some of the only possible explanations are that they either just had no reason to travel by sea again, so they just forgot about the skills and tools needed, or some other event cut them off from the mainland entirely. There's also another interesting theory. Since the people of mainland North Africa were historically nomadic herders, and the Roman Empire was constantly crushing rebellions in North Africa, the Romans could have rounded up these rebellious inland tribes and just dumped them on the Canary Islands. What makes this even more puzzling is that the Guanches developed complex societies, mummification practices, and detailed cave dwellings, all while living in complete isolation from the rest of the world. The Spanish conquered the islands in the 1400s, completely wiping out or assimilating the Guanches and their language.